guitar on the site of the castle.
And it was the first time the Beatles had really stopped being semi-professional almost.
Look at that.
Absolutely fascinating.
That's what you do. You buy these clothes that cost money and make a difference in it. But we never do that.
Never complains, gets up, gets on it, with a smile on his face.
You just want you to sit in your chair and go, hip hip hooray, to the Western press and the Western narrative. You regurgitate the same old, every single day without this. If you haven't seen it before, please watch the first series, the first 2 episodes, the second series. Stallone. And it's Derek, you know, the music, man, first and foremost. Hey, Derek.
Hi, Frank. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, my friends. Happy New Year.
Another year older.
A year old, God blimey. Do you know what one of the lads said there, you know, about Bob Marley?
Yeah.
And we've never really done Bob, have we?
No.
Could you do him in the future?
Yeah, absolutely.
Brilliant. Because I think, do you know, I tell you who it reminds me of, right? You know the way people, like, you know, whatever genre of music they like, no matter what, heavy metal or whatever, right? And everybody likes Johnny Cash. And yes. I think Bob Marley's the same.
I think you're right.
You know what I mean? Those two lads, everybody likes them, if you know what I mean. Bob Marley and Johnny Cash. And they remind me of each other. That's all I mean.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Totally different music. But, so what do you think of that? Do you think I'm right there?
Yeah, that'd be good. Maybe we could do Johnny Cash and Bob Marley in the same show.
Oh, brilliant. And you know what? I think I'll get Jason to play about 20 seconds of each music.
Yeah, that'd be
good.
Know,
to show the difference.
Yeah.
To show the difference, you know, with Bob and Bob. I think I know him, don't you? Bob Marley and Johnny Cash, you know what I mean? That's brilliant. Met Johnny Cash, you know.
Yeah, I remember you saying, brilliant.
Oh, did I tell you, yeah, Johnny. And he said, you know, it was strange the way he said it. He mentioned he wanted to go where the cabin, you know.
Yeah.
And I mentioned Elvis. I said, what did you think of Elvis, you know, Elvis's demise? And he said, Elvis. I said, yeah, Elvis. And he went, you mean Elvis? That's how he pronounced it, Elvis. See that?
Yeah.
I said, all right, Elvis. It's strange how, you know, they've got different interpretations of names. And they do. I see that in films and things, you know. Even in documentaries. I'm going to bring in this great man. Love this guy. My mate, my uncle, Anthony Brown. There he is. Hey, Anthony.
Oh, good evening, all. Good evening, Jeff. Happy New Year, mate.
And you.
Yeah. So, Anthony, I promised one of the lads there, he said, who's your favourite artist? Right? And my favourite artist, I think you can guess, is Leonardo da Vinci.
Yeah.
He's an incredible artist.
He's
You know, to see his work, I've seen his work close up. I've seen Michelangelo's work close up, you know, when I was in the Sistine Chapel. Absolutely amazing. But Da Vinci, just love him. Just love everything about it. Great drawer, great visionary, great everything.
absolutely.
You know, so that's it. Liverpool videos, that's my favourite artist of all time. No, so what? I tell you what English artists are like. Whether Anthony agrees with me, but he will, you know, admire his work, and that's Turner. I love Turner's work.
Turner is right. Yeah, I love him.
I watched a fascinating documentary about Turner, and it was saying that he had hidden messages, and it was talking about the fight in Temeraire, and apparently there's an image of Napoleon on the side of the boat, as it were. Absolutely fascinating stuff.
Go away.
Yeah.
Go away.
Wow. He was totally out there with what he wanted to do. And I was saying to Frank last week or the week before that the fact that I've only recently discovered that for every piece of work he did, he wrote a piece of poetry. Because as he's doing one thing, he's thinking of another.
Yeah.
You hear of lots of painters who kind of paint with a title in mind. You don't know what to produce until you do it. But something comes to mind, like songwriting, and there's a title there, and you work towards that. And Turner was the same, and he would write these poems meant to accompany every picture. But unfortunately, I never ever saw any poetry attached to the display when I went to see him. But I totally agree with Frank. They are the two icons of art, really, that no one has caught up with, and I don't imagine, certainly not in our lifetimes, will anyone catch up with them. You know, music is a similar thing. You know, the greats in music, you know, Mozart and Beethoven, and we talked, three of us, about Bach and how influential these people still are today, you know, in the days of technology. You know.
Well, you can draw with you can draw on like computers and everything else. So really, that's not like proper art, in my opinion. I think you should, you know, get a pencil and start drawing, or get a paintbrush and start painting. That's the way the old fellas did it. That's
the way. That is the greatest way. I mean, we can fool ourselves. There used to be a thing when I didn't last too long in art school because I hated it. It was absolutely horrendously boring, and as a compromise with my mum, I said I'd go in and study graphics. She said, "There's more money in that, you know. The art world is fickle and blah blah blah." So I did, and I lasted 2.5 years, which I thought was quite good going, because it was like eating cold porridge. It didn't do anything, didn't inspire anything, but all the time there's other things going on, music and stuff. And I know you, and Derek too was a musician, you know.
Just imagine what he said. It was like eating a bowl of cold porridge. Some analogy there.
It's just
very appetizing.
So what are we talking about tonight, Derek?
Well, it's the Who, the Keith Moon years. Would you believe it? In 2 days' time, on the 15th of January, it'll be the 60th anniversary of the Who entering the charts with their first single, I Can't Explain. That was 60 years ago this week.
Wow.
Where did that go?
Yeah, I've got that.
It'd be interesting to have a look at them. There's a really interesting parallel with the early Who and early Beatles, how the final lineups came together. I mean, if you look at the Who, Pete Townsend, John Entwistle started back in the late 50s in a band called the Confederates, a trad jazz band. And believe it or not, John Entwistle played the French horn and trumpet, and Pete Townsend played the banjo. They went on then to be in bands called the Aristocrats and the Scorpions. And at this time, sort of late 50s, Roger Daltrey was in forming the Detours, his own group. He was lead guitarist in the beginning, as well as one of the vocalists. And by the end of 62, well, the middle of 62, John Entwistle had joined on bass. Pete Townsend had joined on guitar. And then last to join that particular lineup was a guy called Doug Sandon, the drummer. And that basically was the original. That was the original pre Keith Moon lineup of the Who, because they weren't actually called the Who at the point that Doug Sandon left. Interesting, sort of not parallel, but it might be an urban myth. But Pete Townsend's famous swinging arm guitar motion, apparently he picked up from Keith Richard. They were supporting the Stones in December 63, and they were in the wings. And just before the curtain opened, Townsend saw Keith Richard bring his arm right up, and as the curtain opened, he swooped it down. And Pete Townsend thought, "Oh, I'll have a bit of that," and it became his trademark. And they changed their name from the Detours after a band called Johnny Devlin and the Detours were on Thank You Lucky Stars. So that's when they changed their name to the Who. And this is where the parallel with the Beatles comes in. The 9th of April 64, they had their first audition for Fontana. And they also failed an audition for BBC Radio the same day. But the A&R man that auditioned them, Chris Parmenter, he thought Doug Sandon was a weak link. And like Pete Best, that was the end of his career in the Who, the Detours. And interestingly enough, he'd been with the band for about 2 years, the same sort of period that Pete Best had been with the Beatles, because the name was really fluid at this time. When they auditioned for Fontana, they were called the Who. When they put their first single out, they changed it to the High Numbers. And when Pete Townsend applied to the BBC for the audition, they were called the Detours. And by the day of the audition, they were called the Who. So, there was a lot of...
Any idea why, they renamed, the Detours to the Who? Any idea? Was it like who are these?
I think that was at the bottom of it, basically. It was not really a pun, but, the Who. I think that was... quite a part of it. Interesting audition time as well, before Keith Moon arrived. They actually auditioned Brian Redman, who'd been in the Foremost, and they auditioned Mitch Mitchell before he joined the Jimi Hendrix Experience. So in a parallel universe, you've got a version of the Who possibly with Mitch Mitchell. So that's something to think about. Because, the Who would have been a very, very different band with either of those two drummers.
Can I ask you something? Because Roger Daltrey always just sang, didn't he? He was just the lead singer, that was it. Now, you did surprise me by saying that he was actually a lead guitarist.
Yeah.
Is there anybody, great singer or whatever, who couldn't play an instrument? If you know what I mean, just sing.
I think most of them play guitar. Elvis played guitar. Yeah. A lot of them play. Ringo plays piano and stuff. So I think an awful lot of them, have a musical ability.
So I'm the only singer in the world who can't play a musical instrument. Don't forget, made an echo. So I can't play an instrument, though. But that's me.
Spoons.
Oh, the spoons, yeah, I forgot about that. on the top of the table after me and Gary Rigby's had a bevy at top of the table.
Yeah. And when we were kids, everyone played a kazoo.
Absolutely.
Or a cone.
Bit of paper over the cone.
Yeah.
Can I ask you something, Anthony? Before we go back to the wonderful Derek. The Liverpool video says is James Ensor. Have you ever heard? I've never heard of him. And he said, I was recently in Ostend, Belgium. I saw his house. He lived to love his work. And carries on by saying it's a bit dark, but I love how he criticises society.
Well, that should have been at one time. That was the artist and the musician's duty, is to say something about what was going on in the world. But obviously, not many did, and not many do, and next to none do now. Yeah.
It's strange, isn't it? Okay, Derek, I'm sorry to interrupt, but, I had to get that in. Sorry.
No, absolutely. No, it's interesting how you look, but in the early 60s now, the sort of 1962 time, which is when Keith Moon comes into the story. And he actually, before he got involved with The Who, he actually approached Carlo Little, who was Screaming Lord Sutch's drummer, and asked him for drum lessons, which I think is quite a nice story. He just approached him. I think it was Wembley, a gig there. But what's interesting is how close-knit all these people are, because Carlo Little was one of the drummers, the occasional drummers with the Rolling Stones before Charlie Watts joined. He played with them a few times. So, again, in a parallel universe somewhere, you've got a version of the Rolling Stones with Carlo Little as the drummer. I mean, Keith Moon was in a band called Mark Twain and the Strangers at this point. And they failed an audition for the Light programme, as the BBC pre-Radio 1 days, and they lost out to the Dave Clark 5. And just before the audition, where Keith actually becomes member of The Who, he auditioned for Shane Fenton and the Fentones. Of course, Shane Fenton reinvented himself as Alvin Stardust.
Yeah, Stardust, yeah.
Right, yeah.
And he actually lost out to Bobby Elliott, who found fame with the Hollies. And then it was sort of April 64 when Keith Moon auditioned for The Who, apparently played Bo Diddley, Bo Diddley's Roadrunner. And apparently he destroyed the bass pedal because, the Who had a different drummer at that particular time. Because, he had a fairly heavy-duty approach to drumming. And I can sort of vouch for that. There are very few, if you change the instrument, the gear itself, the instrument, it'll make you a better player. That is very true of the bass pedal for a drummer. I remember, we were support band back in the day, and we supported this other band. And I used his drum kit because they didn't want to set up two. And he had a Slingerland at the time. It was one of the top end makes. And the pedal was so much faster. And I can imagine if he was playing with his style on a pedal that wasn't that expensive, I could see that the various mechanism wouldn't do too well.
Wow, that's incredible. I'll tell you, Eddie Grant. I liked Eddie Grant, and he reminded me a little bit. I'm sorry to go off digress from The Who, but I liked Eddie Grant, and to me, him and Bob Marley, it was the same like music. Am I right by saying that? The same type of music. Eddie Grant.
I think it's in the same sort of area. Yeah, absolutely.
I think Bob Marley opened a lot of doors, didn't he?
Yeah.
He came through. And as you were saying before, guys, about Johnny Cash and Bob Marley, and the thing in common with them, that they were universally, globally loved.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All walks of life.
Absolutely.
And I don't think there's many artists. I mean, that would be a really interesting program to be part of with Derek if we did that. I can't, for the moment, I can't think of one other artist like them other than the Beatles, Lennon maybe, but that is globally accepted and appreciated the way they were,
Yeah, and it's very much sort of cross genre as well. They both influence. I mean, you look at Johnny Cash particularly. He I think quite a lot of influence across more into the sort of rock area as well. And he wasn't really a crossover artist. I mean, he was he was a country artist. But both of those guys, they sort of stretched across. They had a sort of universal appeal. Difficult to put your finger on it and say because of. I think some people it's just like that. It's almost a sort of charisma thing. You can't create charisma, as it were.
Yeah, absolutely.
But Gary says, I'm sorry there, but Gary says, Gary Rigby, that is, don't forget Lee Scratch Perry. He gave Bob Marley a start. He was with the Wailers. He was the Wailers' first producer.
Yeah.
I've never heard of him. And the Liverpool video, when we were talking about the artist, JM, was Turner. That's the same Turner. And Gary says, my favourite artist to be was Aubrey Beardsley. He inspired me to start sketching.
Yeah.
He carries on by saying, I like Dali and the Surrealists.
Yeah.
Oh, no, not me, unfortunately.
Well, it's like music. It's that one will touch the other, and what's interesting listening to Derek when he was talking then about these names, which are now massive names, Keith Moon and stuff, trying to fit in an audition with a band, and now we couldn't imagine that because their individuality is what makes them brilliant.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. And trying to knock the edges off that so that they can fit in another little squeaky band or whatever. You couldn't imagine how bad that would have been, really. And the other one that is surprising because 63 were on the birth of English rock and roll, really.
Absolutely.
And you've got a lot of crossover artists. You mentioned two brilliant drummers, Mitch Mitchell and Charlie Watts, who were jazzers, weren't they?
Yeah,
absolutely. Both had a jazz background.
Yeah.
I mean, Charlie Watts played for Alexis Corner, the original Blues Incorporated. And he was still semi-pro. Can you imagine? He's still at his day job as a graphic designer, funnily enough. While he was playing for Alexis Corner, he didn't turn pro apparently until he joined the Stones.
Wow! Wow!
How different it could have been. And
absolutely. But the Who story is interesting because we're really at the sort of first piece of the jigsaw now. They had a second audition for Pete Meaden, for Parmiter, for Fontana, and this time now Keith Moon's with them, and. They were very involved with a guy called Peter Meaden at this stage. He was big in the whole mod thing. And it was Peter Meaden that was very much the guy that created or helped them create their whole mod image. And he persuaded them to change their name from the Who to the High Numbers. So, they were the Who before they were the High Numbers. And they released one single, Zoot Suits and I'm Your Face. And it was actually promoted as the first, literally, quotes, the first authentic mod record. It didn't trouble the charts at all, but it really got them moving. And then they came to their first successful single as the first single as the Who, I Can't Explain. And it's rumoured that Jimmy Page played. Well, let's say the jury's out as to whether Jimmy Page played on the guitar. I mean, a sort of 15, 16-year-old Jimmy Page was doing loads of session work, and he did do session work with them. And I think what the background to that is that, you know, they all do several takes. And it's not definitively known whether Jimmy Page actually plays on the takes that ended up as the single. Now in '65, the October is '65, My Generation, which is absolute classic. And that's what really, you know, when the live show, they ended with My Generation. That's when Mooney would wreck his drum kit, and Townsend would smash his guitar into the floor and the Marshall stacks.
It's interesting that their album Live at Leeds, which obviously was a bit later, I think 1970, is still regarded as one of the greatest live performances to be captured on record ever.
Absolutely.
And the Alfred Ross says, evening to the three wise men. And look at all those.
Oh, great.
Look at all the drinks.
Thank you.
Give you an idea of how volatile the group was. I mean, Roger Daltrey, apparently he was a sheet metal worker, I think, apprentice. I'm not sure if he actually finished his apprenticeship, but I'm sure he was a sheet metal worker. A bit of a hard man, apparently, in his time. And in the November of '65, they were playing Wembley Pool, and they were using the house PA system, which was pretty appalling, certainly in Daltrey's mind. So he just stormed off the stage, and then the Who's road crew set up their own PA system. He came back when it was fixed. Apparently, the other three played on without him. Of course, Daltrey sings a bit, Entwistle sings a bit.
Yeah,
but that must have it shows really. I mean, they used to have fights on stage. There's another story sort of coming up a bit later where, you know, they would, you know, Mooney ended up with a black eye and one of these things, and he'd throw cymbals at Daltrey. See, it's a really strange relationship.
That's part of the energy that goes with something like that.
Absolutely.
And also part of the thing that when it's brilliant, it's really, really brilliant.
Yeah.
I know moving forward, and just in passing, the rock band The Police were very similar to that. It was a very, very volatile, physical relationship. But when it worked well, they were fantastic. But they'd be in the back room, you know, knocking holes out of each other, which...
Is there anyone who's left a band, for example, you know, like a famous band or whatever, but, hang on, no, I've got that wrong. Has anybody left a band or been thrown out of a band and joined another band and became famous? Do you know what I mean? You know, like Jimmy Page, you're talking about him, you know. Has anybody ever done that, if you know what I mean? You know, thrown out, they weren't good enough. And, you know, obviously the band never made it either way. But that particular person who was thrown out of the band went on to achieve stardom.
Well, I can think of one example, not so much of a band that wasn't famous. I mean, Lemmy was famously thrown out of Hawkwind. They were touring in North America, and they were crossing the border from the US into Canada. And he was a bass player. Lemmy got stopped by the Canadian customs because he had some white powder. And they, of course, obviously thought it was either smack or coke or something. But when they checked it, they found it was only amphetamine. And the Canadian authorities didn't think that was a proper drug. So they let him on his way. But the band sacked him anyway. And that was when he went off and formed Motorhead.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Lemmy. I didn't know that at all. I've still got his, what is it? I took that Silver Machine. I've still got it. I couldn't sing it then. But, I think with the fighting and everything else, there's, a few of the comments are coming up. Is that why, Anthony, I got it over the head with, the guitar? Because the famous fella, who's a good friend of ours, was backing me. That's great. Are you saying that right? So, you know,
really, the hardest slap you're going to get in your life is off a Fender Stratocaster guitar, because there's some serious weight in that.
Oh, absolutely.
If it hits you in the right way, I
in any way,
a couple of people over with it, but not knocked a couple of people out. But there was all of that, and going back to the Who and their antics, I remember being very young, but always been a fan, and when watching Pete Townsend frantically try and destroy the guitar, bouncing off the floor, and
absolutely.
And the guitar wasn't going anywhere, and it would wound them up, and then Keith Moon would start the same thing. It was like a circus.
Absolutely.
I think that was the biggest. Had they not been great players, and they were all phenomenal. John Entwistle, as a musician, was just phenomenal. Had they not been great players, that would have fizzled out and gone within a year, maybe less.
Yeah. I mean, Entwistle's bass line on My Generation is absolutely awesome. You know, you don't even need to isolate it. It's right up at the top of the mix, and it's absolutely brilliant. We'll just mention his Substitute, actually, one of my all-time favourite Who singles. If anybody's ever looked at the B-side and wondered why they call themselves the Who Orchestra, there's quite a legal story attached to that. What happened was, this is when they left Brunswick, and Shel Talmy, who produced their stuff to date, joined Track Records. Kit Lambert was now their manager. And the first song they released on Track was Substitute and Instant Party. Now, Shel Talmy back at Brunswick took a dim view of this, because they'd already recorded Instant Party. So he put it out on Brunswick as a single, Legal Matter, coupled with Instant Party, and immediately took out a lawsuit, an injunction to stop sales and prevent the Who from recording. So they you know, their single Substitute just started to chart, and they were expecting it to do very well, as you would. So what happened is they brought in the Graham Bond organization, and under the name of the Who Orchestra, they put a different B-side, re-released Substitute with a new B-side, Who Orchestra, Waltz for a Pig. Ginger Baker was in the Graham Bond organization that time, and Ginger Baker actually wrote that, and apparently bought his first car on the songwriting proceeds of that song. Sadly, he crashed it within weeks.
What a story. I did hear a story which you might be able to say yeah or nay, it was fake or whatever, that Pete Townsend, when they started to earn a bit of money, he bought a house in, I think it was somewhere like Kensington, very upmarket London, in amongst the lords and ladies who all lived in the houses, rather like our Victoria Street, where that's how close the houses were. And he used to receive complaints from people to say I was too scruffy, too loud. He didn't like his car being parked outside all the time. So constant sniping. So that's when he wrote My Generation.
Yeah.
Which lyrically, if you listen to the lyrics, you know,
it's brilliant.
Hope I die before I get old.
Get old. Yes.
Like you, gang of complainers.
It shows you, doesn't it, though, you know, how music resonates with us all. You know, it gives you great memories, gives you bad memories.
Yeah.
Excuse me, it gives you bad memories as well, but more so good memories than anything else. It reminds you of family, it reminds you of friends, it reminds you of loved ones, you know, loved ones in the past. It reminds you of everything. And that's the beauty of music.
Yeah.
And that's,
totally.
you know what?
Become a landmark. It's a landmark in life.
Yeah,
interesting you should say that about Bad Memories, because Tommy, arguably the one of the pinnacles of the Who's career. Certainly, very, very famous for it. Sometimes often considered to be the first rock opera, but SF Sorrow from Pretty Things was actually released before that. But Tommy goes back. Tommy was released in the sort of early summer of '69. But it goes back to '67 when they were on a tour of America, and the plane developed engine trouble. Apparently had an emergency landing, and it was a very bumpy ride, and it was quite a nerve-wracking experience. This is a serious in-flight problem they went with, and it inspired Pete Townsend to write a plane crash song called "Glow Girl." Which was intended to be a single, but for whatever reason, it never came out as a single. But it did come out on their Odds and Sods album, so it's not difficult to get hold of and listen to. But what's interesting is one of the lines in "Glow Girl" is "It's a girl, Mrs. Walker, it's a girl." Well, of course, in Tommy, it's a boy, Mrs. Walker, it's a boy, and that's very much. Was the sort of start of some of the thoughts for Tommy. Just worth mentioning, the other big inspiration for Tommy was the Indian avatar Meher Baba. That was silence for about 20 years. But it was very much, Pete Townsend was introduced to him by Mike McInnery. I think he was the editor of International Times, but he's the guy that designed the Tommy cover. And he introduced Pete Townsend to Meher Baba, and it was those teachings that inspired the sort of idea behind the Tommy project.
So, can I ask you about? I know I'm digressing again, but you did mention about designing a cover, an album cover.
Mm-hmm.
What's in your opinion? Just yours. What's the greatest album cover that you've seen?
Very difficult.
You've got the likes of The Wall, haven't you? Pink Floyd.
Oh, yeah.
You've got it was plain, but it gave a message out, didn't it?
Yeah,
it really did. You've got the likes. Lynn Ellis plays Evening, Frank and Anthony and Derek. Evening, Lynn.
Evening, Lynn.
Hi.
I think the Who, in terms of album covers, were closer to the image of the Stones.
Yes.
Whereby they were not looking for global acceptance. They wanted the music to be liked. But there's one particular album, I think it's Who's Next, which is like a war memorial or something, some sort of memorial. And the photographer, I think, had the idea to squirt water on the wall so it looked like the band had peed on this memorial.
That's right.
I think that was the kind of shock factor that was going on with the because they were absolutely the world leaders as a live band, as a live act.
Oh, absolutely. And
do you know what my favourite album was? My favourite, the first album I ever bought was Please Please Me by the Beatles.
Yeah.
I was the very first one of your kids, loved them. And but my favourite one was a Beatles one. It was a Beatles one.
What, Revolver?
What?
Revolver, was it?
It was Revolver. How's she did?
Well, I mean, that is a classic. Designed by the Hamburg mate, wasn't it? Klaus Voormann. It's awesome. I really like some of those. I mean, that prog era that sold about 10 or 15 albums. But some, you had gatefold sleeves. But some of those prog sleeves, I think one of the Comus albums. I don't think it was. I can't remember the name of it, but it folded out into about 8 pieces. It was an absolutely stunning piece of artwork in its own right. But I mean, there are some great sleeves. I mean, Simplicity, the Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon. There's no name of the album. There's no name of the band. It's just plain, but it's just so effective. You just recognize it.
The way you're both talking there, we're both talking about pieces of art, not like, throws the cover on that album. They became pieces of art. I think there was a time period, possibly throughout the 60s and 70s. I think it stopped towards the 80s when
absolutely
merchandise became less artistic but more practical. Just get the product out. But interesting, in those 20 years, we have got some of the greatest pieces of art as album covers.
Absolutely.
And Dark Side of the Moon was something else that
absolutely
really was.
It's interesting you should mention Who's Next as well, because that was a spin-off from a failed project, probably the greatest lost rock and roll album of all time. In the sort of beginning of 71, Townsend started off his project called Lifehouse, and it was intended to be a movie and an album. And they were recording at the Young Vic live performances to be included with audience reaction in the movie itself. And they had some recording sessions in New York with Leslie West, the fabulous guitarist from Mountain, Al Cooper. And what the Universal Studios was behind it initially. And what it was is fascinating. It was sort of futuristic storyline set in a post-apocalyptic, polluted, mind-controlled world. So you can imagine how it wasn't difficult for this whole project to overstretch itself. And what happened was the hero attempts, I love this, the hero attempts to create freedom through rock and roll. I mean, it doesn't actually happen. And in the final concert planned in the film, the people at the concert and the mind control people just sort of evaporate into thin air. And sadly, that project ran out of steam, basically. Far too complicated, probably. But some of the songs were rescued for Who's Next. Baba O'Reilly, Behind Blue Eyes, and Won't Get Fooled Again were originally going to be part of the Lifehouse. Yeah.
They are some of the greatest rock songs ever.
Absolutely.
Just brilliant. And we talked before about musicians and writers saying something with their art. And obviously the one that comes to mind is Won't Get Fooled Again.
Yeah.
Which is, I think, is a political statement, wasn't it?
I think that's the idea, yeah.
You vote.
Well, Gary Rigby says two best new albums, A Quick One and Sold Out.
Yeah. Well, a quick one's really interesting because there's a track on that called Quick One While He's Away. It's a sort of 20-minute mini opera, and the Rolling Stones decided they'd have a Christmas special in '68, TV Christmas special, and they recorded it, and the Who were part of the part of that show, and they played a storming version, A Quick One While He's Away, and so storming that basically Mick Jagger thought that the Who had to completely upstage the Stones, and that particular Christmas special never came off and didn't see the light of day until a 1996 DVD. Also famous for being Brian Jones's last live performance and John Lennon's first live performance outside of the Beatles with a band called Dirty Mac, with Eric Clapton on guitar, Keith Richards on bass, and Mitch Mitchell on drums.
Sensational project. What I read long after the event, in recent times when I bought the DVD, obviously there's acts like Taj Mahal in there as well, who's sensational.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
you can see everyone else plugging to get him. I think Brian Jones even played the drums for him.
Yeah.
It's just that thing of they wanted everyone to do well. And the Who, I remember reading a story about the Who, that they went on there because they waited so long. By the time they got on there, they drunk 3 bottles of brandy between, and they were absolutely wobbled.
Yeah.
And then they chose a kind of semi-operatic piece, which they've been working on, but not rehearsed greatly. And it was hard to perform time because they were all singing. And it's fantastic. For anyone who's not seen it, that would be my thing is to see that and know that they're drunk when they're performing this piece of magic. Just brilliant. Rock and roll.
Well,
Essence of
even in Frank Anthony and Derek, some iconic album covers down the years. Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, Nirvana with the baby on the front, and Iron Maiden's many albums always had great art.
She did. And the other band that I loved in the 70s was Thin Lizzy.
Oh, absolutely.
And there used to be, for most of the album arts, was a guy who's still active now, still working. He's 80, 81, Jim Fitzpatrick. And his artwork is very, very Celtic, very beautiful, detailed line drawings, coloured, and just sensational. And it was just, like I say, it's just a thing. I think that was the greatest period for music and for art, because it was like the doors were open 1959 or whatever, and then all this stuff came out. Maybe as a consequence of the war, whatever. It's like, let's not live in black and white anymore. Let's just enjoy life. And
You've got to enjoy life. You've got to enjoy life. Don't forget, out, brief candle. That's our life. Out, brief candle. Well, anyway, Dennis Paparak, all the way from Tampa, he says, "Hi guys, just out of the meeting from hell." And on that, we're going to the break, and Dennis, you'll be made up with the break. This is for you.
I thought you were going to do a Keith Moon with that organ.
Oh, do you know what? That was shocking. Honestly, trying to get that, and it was the biggest. It was the biggest organ in the world at the time, and I was trying to come out with it, And I always remember another outtake was the lions, on St. George's Hall Plateau.
Yeah.
And at the back, on the rump of the lion, there's a big hole in it. And that's where the water was going in, like a pipe or something like that. You should have heard me trying to mention about the hole and the lion, And there's a big hole at the back of the lion. I said, I can't say that, So there was lots of outtakes, there was loads of them. I was talking about 3 lovely old ladies were standing there, seeing them out the corner of my eye. I was in Pembroke Place, and I was explaining that there was a duel, and the fella, right here, right on the spot here, and he dropped dead, the shot was fired, went through his eye, dropped dead. And these women were like that. We're fed up with you. We're fed up with you people coming around filming. There was no murder here last night. There was not. I was saying, no, it was happened in 1805. Never mind 1805. There was no murders here. Oh, I should have heard them. But we had that. We had that on tape, but someone went over it, unfortunately.
Oh,
And that was being one of the best ever. Should have heard them, screaming at me. I was going, no, I said, she thought it was going to have a report to someone, So it's things like that. It's just, and as Dennis says, LMAO, of course, priceless, he says. And he says, bragging about, yes. And great outtakes, them, Frank. They were always a good laugh on your DVDs with Snelly. Yeah, because no matter what, we're not fallible, but we're just like, we're fallible. We're not infallible, if you know what I mean.
yeah.
And we do make mistakes. Some of the greatest actors of all time make mistakes. Richard Burton made mistakes,
Absolutely.
and they all had outtakes, so why not me? And Roger Phillips says, oh, don't do that, it's not professional. I said, no.
No.
I said,
Well,
the people will laugh. And that was it.
I think it was because Paul McCartney left a guitar leaning against an amplifier, and they recorded the sound of feedback, which led to "I Feel Fine."
Yeah.
Like a piece of music. Happy Accidents are just brilliant. Love them.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, love them.
Well, the thing is, you see, when, like talking about history and trying to get us over, in the appropriate way, I had loads of, when we were always on location, we had to be on location, to show the buildings or whatever and where we were. And you had loads of cars, especially on a road, going past and beeping, as you obviously see in the camera and things like that, and beep, And I always remember being outside the old Royal, and I was talking about Agnes Jones. I was talking about that lovely lady, Anyway, it was a big, long thing, and I never had a script. It was just off the cuff. But I knew what I was talking about, so I had about five takes on this one. And I got right down, and I was saying to myself, I've only got another line to go. I was getting right there. And as I got to it, this car went past and went beep. So it's one of those things. Can I show you something, boys? Go on.
Water's in my mouth when I see you at the top of the stairs at somewhere like St. George's Hall, because I hate them steps.
Yeah,
I come down like kind of 1.1 miles an hour. And
I could walk them. To be honest. As I say now, me and you, when I go to, you bring me even Lainey's got the pair of us. She's in the middle of her, holds on to Lainey. So it's all changed. Look at this one here. Now, see that was a ship, that was a frigate, that was a warship, it was a frigate. And the Royal Navy, they gave it to Liverpool, and that became, believe it or not, a ship for services, for the sailors. Yeah. Albeit that the church and the pierhead, was there, but that became a ship for the services of all sailors, and it was known as the Mariners' Church, 1843, and it was there for years. But have you ever heard, Anthony, of Father Nugent?
Yes.
Well, Father Nugent, what he did, like for these kids, and most of them were orphans, he put them on the ship to become able seamen. Him and Major Lester, the pair of them. And they got these kids, put them on the ship to learn a trade, able seamen. And that's what that ship became as well. So just besides the likes of being a service, for sailors just getting up, bang, and there it is. As you can see, it was a warship. So you can see the juxtaposition from taking lives to a service ship, a church, a mariner's church. And you can see the turrets there, where the cannons were. Incredible, it's an incredible piece of history. And that's what the British Navy at the time, they said, you can have this. We asked for it, to be honest. And it was sailed up, put in the dock, and that's where it was.
Wow.
And St. Nick's Church was there at the time. Not many say. Don't forget, this was the port of 1,000 ships, and all the sailors couldn't fit in one church. That's St. Nick. So they held that as well, for the mariners. Brilliant, absolutely brilliant.
I've never heard of it.
Have you ever heard of it? No.
No, thank you.
No, it's I think it should be mentioned because what Liverpool gave, and I'm talking about sailors from all around the world, so that they could go to a service, because it was very religious going back to the 19th century, the mid 19th century. It was very religious, and people, especially sailors, they went to these services, thanking God that they had a safe journey. And they went back on board the ship when they were sailing out. So they went back to the mariner's ship or St. Nick's for a safe journey out.
Yeah.
Which was great. There was also just up by Crosby there, the wishing well. And the wishing well was this sort of, it wasn't a well as such, but that's where like wives went to this particular place to wave off, the people there, the sailors going past, sailing up the Mersey. So, it was very superstitious. It was very superstitious. And I thought, that it should be mentioned, and especially about this wonderful ship of ours. What do you think of it?
Wow, just amazing. Totally understand the need for spirituality.
Oh yeah.
To thank God and please God, let me come back safe to the wife and the family. All of that.
Yeah. Because no matter where you are in the world, it's just like how we got the name Scouse, to be honest, and it came from the Norwegians. So all around the world, the sailors, obviously talking in bars and places like that, and Little Inns, wherever. And where are you from? You always ask sailors where they're from, and they say from here and from there, from there. And if anyone from Liverpool said Liverpool, they say, Scouse. Because, the Norwegians made this lobscouse. And we copied it because it was nourishment, especially.
So it was kind of a maritime, a sailor's dialogue before it became bigger.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So that's how Scouts, and that's how we became Scousers.
Yeah.
All right.
Did you know that, Eric? No?
I didn't know. I didn't know that at all, Frank.
See, what had happened, there was a lad by the name of Daniel Brocklebank, and he went to Canada. He's a young American, and he went to Canada and he tried to open up a whaling thing. And they said, no, we there's too many of us. Too many whaling things here. You can't open one here. This is in Canada. So anyway, what he did, he came to Liverpool in 1774, this young lad, and he opened up the Brocklebank thing because he wanted to do whaling. And obviously, Liverpool lads, they never had a clue. They never had a clue. Whaling, they'd never heard of it. So what he did, he sent for these Norwegians who went whaling. They went whaling. So they came over, when he sent for them. And anyway, obviously, he had to have some Liverpool crew as well. And when they went sailing, especially up into the Arctic, the cold waters, to catch these whales, they were making this lobscouse, which is scouse today. Everything went into this big pot. Everything. I'm talking about potatoes. Everything went into it. Carrots, onion, you name it. They went in, and meat. I went into it, and it was called lobscouse. Well, lobscouse, Lopskause. It's a Norwegian thing. So anyway, by the time the whaling had stopped, and the ordinary seamen, the Liverpool lads, when they went away on other ships or other destinations, they always made this lobscouse, and the lop was taken off. Scouse, rather than the SK and the AU, it became SCOUSE, Scouse, and they just, called it Scouse, and that's where, people from all around the world said, Scouse, other sailors, that is, from Liverpool, Scouse. And believe it or not, I used to have a picture. Whales used to come up the Mersey, and then whatever they did with whales, getting the blubber and the oil and whatever out of the whale, and then they built an arch of whalebone up in Everton. Where the monument is there today. Well, they had a big arch of whalebone.
Wow.
So there's things like that which is forgotten. It's just forgotten, and it's like the lockup itself, which is, how can I put this? People say they call it the Tower of Cromwell.
Rupert,
Rupert, during the Cromwellian, wars here in Liverpool, and it wasn't. Cromwell. Rupert didn't build that because he was here between May and June 1644, and yet that particular tower, that lockup, was built in 1787. So it was well after, Rupert was here. Rupert's Castle, as they called it. So there's things like that. That's a little myth surrounding Rupert and the castle. Wasn't even built, it was built well over 100 years later.
Misinformation, even in them days.
Yeah, even in those. Let's see what the lads have to say. Dennis says, when I was in the US Navy, 84 and 90, I had a deck of cards. When I knew I have 54 days left on the ship before heading home from Napoli, I chucked a card a day over the side and kept the 2 jokers for last. That's mad, that, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's mad. And he carries on by saying, when I was in the US, he said that. He said it. And the jokers to the last. It's surprising though, isn't it, the way what sailors do. But he was in the USAF, the US Navy. And there's the the well, there's the wishing well. And there it is. That's when people used to stand on the shores and wave to the people. And it's fantastic, you know, to think that the people prayed, because it was very harsh then. These were only wooden ships, and they got into heavy seas. Lots never came back. And especially, you know, with wars during the 19th century, wars with, you know, France and Spanish before then, you know. So this is what you had, and they never ever came back, unfortunately. Never came back. So Liverpool has a great maritime history, and you should know, Derek, that the likes, and you, Anthony, that the likes of the sea shanties,
Yeah.
you know, especially the Irish, you know, and their sea shanties, the leaving of Liverpool, you know, was one of the greatest songs, if you like, about Liverpool itself, the leaving of Liverpool.
Yeah.
You know, the heartbreak and everything else. And, you know, so you have these wonderful sea shanties.
Yeah.
Well, that shut you up, didn't it? Because it doesn't know about sea shanties.
Well, we know some of the songs, but the song which myth that goes around the songs, it's like the song "Dirty Old Town" that we assume was written by Irish musicians and is about Dublin, when in fact it's written about Salford, Manchester, and it was written by a fabulous sounding guy, and I'm sure Derek knows a lot more about him. There was a lady in the 80s who was in the charts, and she sang with the Pogues and everything, called Kirsty MacColl. Her father, I think Ewan
McCall, yeah,
was a musician, songwriter, a screenwriter, a scriptwriter, and an actor. And he partly started with his then wife, whose name I've forgotten, forgive me, in Manchester, Salford Theatre. And as part of his duties, he was asked to write a song to fill 5 or 10 minutes while a cast can go off, change their costumes, come back on again. And he wrote the most beautiful song, I think, ever in the world. And it's called "First Time Ever I Saw Your Face." And I was blown away when I found that information. That's just like crafted the way Gershwin or Lennon McCartney or someone would craft it. And it was purely a tool so that Mary and John could go change the frock and come back on in Act 2. I'm thinking, wow. And he also wrote the song "Dirty Old Town" about the gas. Which we Liverpudlians we associate ourselves with, because the whole theme of the song is, you know, I'll meet you by the gasworks walls and all of this stuff, the bottle factory, and it's all Garston and the docks, and it sounds like, you know, belongs here. And Dublin is the same, you know, but it's about Salford.
Well, I was given a talk in the concert room, St. George's Hall. It was absolutely chock-a-block. People had to be turned away. So anyway, it goes on, you know, the stage. And it starts off, and I said, listen, I said, I'm not doing any history today. I said, I'm going to sing sea shanties. And I want to start off with a sea shanty. And it's 40 verses long. And it takes about 25 to 30 minutes to sing through. But you'll all get to know what the chorus is. And when you get to know the chorus, I want you all to join in with me. And they were all sitting there like that. The gobs on them.
Wow.
I'm only kidding. I said, just singing a shanty. But, it's good the way, some people react. And I love the reaction of people, when I gave these talks and that. Well, you've seen me, haven't you? And I just look at them.
Well, that's what we are. We're a maritime city, aren't we? And that's our heritage. And the sea shanties were such a part of it. And it's only been really the past modern years that they've stopped, because there used to be a festival every year, and it used to be free, and you could walk into pubs like the beautiful Baltic Fleet on the waterfront, and then walk along the waterfront, and you'd hear all these brilliant singers. I remember years in the late 80s meeting Pete McGovern, who wrote In My Liverpool Home, stuff and songs like that. It was such our own version of patriotism, about Liverpool. Just such feel-good songs.
Well, that is patriotism.
Yeah.
And, you get a lot of, patriotic stuff. And it's great to think, in my Liverpool home, obviously, and the leaving of Liverpool is absolutely fantastic. Who could make up a song? We speak with an accent exceedingly rare.
Yeah.
And, if you want a cathedral, we've got one to spare. It's incredible, how it was, put together.
Yeah.
Beautiful,
Yeah. And he was a lovely, lovely guy, humble, no ego.
No.
He was just he's proud of where he comes from, as we all are.
All Scousers are, it's great the way, there's lads on it. Look at Tennis Paparak. Tennis Paparak he's a proper American. He's not an expat or anything.
No.
He is no expat. And yet, he loves coming over to Liverpool. And him and his little band, he's got a band, he's in a band. And they play the Cavern pub. They come over. And it's great. That's what they want to do. They love Liverpool. Just love it. And I think it's great. And Derek, did you ever go to any of the Beatles festivals, what we had in the August?
No, I haven't been to any of those.
I think your book would do sensational well in that environment. Derek,
it would,
And I know it used to be something like you pay £100 for the weekend, and you get your table and stuff. But Derek's book would appeal to every music fan. Certainly,
it's an encyclopedia. It's an encyclopedia, which is phenomenal, really. Yeah. It's phenomenal, because it tells you everything you need to know about music, about bands. We've only just been listening to them.
And all of the connections as well.
Connections, yeah. Which is
to that guy,
No, I didn't know Lemmy was actually sacked.
Yeah.
By Hawkwind.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Can you guys actually hear me? I've my pictures disappeared on the screen, and I've got a message that the camera's not working.
No, we can't hear you, Derek. I'm only joking. We can hear you. We can hear you. That's no problem. If you want to say something, please say it, Dave.
No, I was just concerned. I've got a message saying my browser's lost connection to the camera, and on the screen I'm looking at, I can see you two guys, but there's just a sort of black rectangle where I used to be.
Yeah.
But we've still got volume, so
I
won't start pressing any buttons because they don't really know what I'm doing.
If you quit the app, Derek, if you kind of close it down, quit it, and then join it again.
And come in again.
Yeah.
I'll try that. Okay, I'll see you in a minute.
I'll see you coming in and open the door for you.
Aaron Dennis says, for me, it's the generous hospitality of the people, the ease of getting tucked in over pints, the architecture, the ease of getting around. I always feel at home there.
Brilliant.
Isn't that lovely?
Fantastic. Yeah.
That's lovely.
Yeah.
It really is.
Yeah.
And, to think that here's Derek back. Jesus.
There he is. Good looking one.
There he is.
There you go.
I don't know what happened there.
See, he's not only a fantastic international artist, he's a genius.
Absolutely.
Is that Anthony? Who's your favourite artist? I mean in art, in the art what Anthony does. I don't want to put you on the spot there.
Because I get very confused and sometimes angry when you read something, the greatest artists of the century, and you're reading about, some squeaky little Taylor whatever, and I'm thinking they're pop singers, they're not. But it's an American. I think it's an Americanism to call anyone who performs an artiste.
All right.
So, but my favourite artist with a bit of paint. You're thinking?
I was asking the wonderful Derek there.
Yeah.
I know who yours is, but you can't talk about him anyway. But who's your favourite artist with the paint?
I've got a few that I really like. I mean, I really quite like the Surrealists as well, and I'm quite a big Dali fan. But I like Hieronymus Bosch. I think the Garden of Earthly Delights is an awesome thing. I was lucky enough to see it. I was in Madrid, and it was there. There was several Bosch paintings there, and it's just awesome. I mean, the detail. I don't know how long it took him to paint it, but the whole thing is so hellish in a way, and I think it's just awesome.
The thing is, with me, unfortunately, Jason just said Anthony's after my job.
I could not do your job for all the world.
Switches off and come back.
If I've learned it from you, Jason, I've learned everything I know from you. Chain yourself off, bring yourself back.
Switch it off and switch it on again. It's the universal IT panacea.
It is. I mean, years ago, it used to be give it a tap with a hammer.
Yeah, exactly.
And then come back.
Oh, I can remember the horizontal hold on the TV. If you gave it a bit of a tap on the side, sometimes it worked.
Scouse Red says, I once drank at a bar next to Sydney Harbour Bridge where an Irish band were playing. I asked the lead singer what part of Ireland he was from. Jerry Gardens, lad, he replied. I'm from Jerry Gardens.
Wow.
What a small world. What a small world. Well, and there you go. From the Scouse Red.
Liverpool.
What part of Ireland are you from Jerry Gardens? It's incredible. Absolutely amazing. I just love it, the way Liverpool, as I said about Derek, I think for me, he says, it's the generous hospitality of the people, the ease of getting tucked in over pints, the architecture and ease of getting around. I always feel at home there. I think that's a fantastic sentiment about an American who comes over to Liverpool, and he's a great big fan of the Beatles. A big fan. I think most of Americans are, to be who's into music, if you know what I mean. And he says, Derek, if you're ever in St. Petersburg, Florida, check out the Dali Museum there. You won't be disappointed.
Oh, I'd look forward to that if I was ever there.
Yeah.
That'd be brilliant.
Do you think that Dali painted, or, whatever, his work was self-expression of himself? Because he was very eccentric, wasn't he? And very flamboyant.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I'm sure it was. I'm sure it's true of a lot of artists. But the thing about Dali is, I mean, you're sitting inside the guy's imagination, which I find really quite fascinating. I mean, interestingly enough, what sort of brought me into fine arts and getting into pictures, as it were the pre-Raphaelites. One of the first things I was amazed about was like how much like a photograph it was almost. I was just so impressed by the sort of technicality of the paintings. And then the more you start looking at them, I mean, is it Rossetti, the one with the Shakespeare, the Ophelia in the stream?
Yeah.
Floating in the stream.
Fantastic.
Absolutely awesome.
They were hated in London when they brought that out.
Yeah.
Because it's different. And the detail was part of the reason why they were mocked and ridiculed. And they couldn't get a gig in their own city. They were all quite wealthy to do guys from London. And then their first gig, exhibition-wise, was in Liverpool.
Oh, right.
We had our own version of the Royal Academy, which stood on the ground of where our Walker Art Gallery stands now. And in the 1840s, 50s, when they were looking to show their first exhibition, Holman Hunt and the rest of the guys, they came here because no one else would show them. And then after a couple of exhibitions, London opened their eyes, and that is just sensational.
That's the one. Yeah.
Yeah. The lady who posed for that was she married one of, there's so many stories with them. They're like rock stars. These people. She married the Gabrielle Rossetti, and he kind of didn't treat her very well. She became a drug addict, laudanum, and sadly passed away at a young age. And he was so guilty. And again, like a rock star, all of his lyrics, all of his poetry he'd written, he buried with her. And then 6 years after that, his publicist and his agent said, we should do a book of poetry about love. Remember all those poems you wrote to your deceased wife, saying how much? And he thought, they're all buried. So they dug them up.
Wow.
They dug the coffin up, got the lyrics. She was apparently so well preserved that it was like she'd only just gone down. But they got the word in. He couldn't touch him. They went straight to the publisher, turned into a book, and it flopped. I don't think it sold more than a few hundred. Just,
Can I read a poem that I had written?
Yes.
And it was for Halloween. Sophie had asked me, she said, will you write a poem, Grandad? I said, okay. And it's called Blank Paper. called Blank Paper. Almost the witching hour, the ticking clock, tick-tock. I'm staring down at blank paper as the cat goes prowling about. What's he looking for? Something has made him curious. Is it the silence as the clock ticks? Or is it something more sinister? Still nothing written down. Black paper and empty. The cat's still curious, still prowling and staring. Midnight clock chiming. The flap springs to life. Through the window I see it, hunched and ready to pounce. The last time I saw it, 5 long months ago, at the witching hour, through darkness, disappeared. My paper blank no more, the strange disappearance of my curious prowling cat, written down on blank paper. The witching hour, the deadly silence, the darkness, the curiousness, the ticking clock, the blank paper. Will it ever be seen? Perhaps tonight on Halloween.
That's excellent, Frank.
Love it.
That's excellent, mate.
So that's what I'd written for my little granddaughter Sophia, you know, and she brought it in. I had to bloody write it out because he haven't got a printer. You know? That's how I wrote it out for her, you know. And even a teacher said, can we print that and put it up? And she just said, yeah. So it was printed up, you know, on the wall, you know, on the school wall, which is nice, you know.
Absolutely.
Beautiful.
So it's things that come to your mind. It's like what you said, Anthony, you know, about these artists who had written poems about their works.
Yeah.
It's like Shakespeare. Shakespeare writes in a way that you picture it. You picture everything. Dickens went descriptive writing. Like I mentioned, the 5th chapter, keynote it's called, of Our Times. And what it is, Dickens is sitting, looking down. You know, he's eating his Everton mint, and he's looking down from Everton. And this keynote is absolutely outstanding. If you've got Hard Times, just get onto the 5th chapter, the first page. And what he's describing it like a city that's like savages, you know, people coming in and out of the homes, going to work, like painted savages, he says. And the trail and smoke from the chimneys like serpents, coiled serpents. And the machines going up and down, like melancholy elephants. So he's describing a jungle. And the even smell and dye, there it is. And, you know, to think it was a town of red brick, or of brick that would have been red if the smoke and ashes had allowed it. But as matters stood, it was a town of unnatural red and black, like the painted face of a savage. It was a town of machinery and tall chimneys, out of which interminable serpents of smoke trailed themselves forever and ever, and never got uncoiled. It had a black canal in it, and a river that ran purple, with its evil smell and dye, and vast piles of building full of windows, where there was rattling and a trembling all day long, and where the piston of the steam engine worked monotonously up and down, like the head of an elephant in a state of melancholy madness. It contains several large streets, all very one like one another, and many small streets still more like one another, inhabited by people equally like one another, who all went in and out at the same hours, with the same sounds upon the same pavement, to do the same work, and to whom every day was the same as yesterday and tomorrow, and every year the counterpart of the last and the next.
That's awesome.
Amazing.
Because you've got juxtaposed, you've got the two images, you've got the piston going in and out, and the people's lives doing exactly the same. That's an incredible piece of writing.
It is, because he is the greatest descriptive writer ever. And I tell you another descriptive writer who was absolutely fantastic. I love this man, by the way. I love Dickens, there's no parallel to him, only there's Shakespeare. But this man only wrote one book, one novel, this fella. And the descriptive writing out of him, you've all have heard of him, and you've all heard of the book as well. But he only written one novel, which surprised me, actually. When I was studying this chap, and his name was Oscar Wilde, and he wrote the picture of Dorian Gray, but the descriptive writing was absolutely fabulous, just like Dickens.
Well, the one writer that came to mind as you were reading that was definitely someone who was inspired by Dickens' work, was George Orwell.
Orwell, yeah.
For that descriptiveness.
Oh.
We're seeing what he's writing, which I love. And I love it when authors can take you on a journey. I loved Stephen King when he came out in the 70s, because at the time there was no one like him, I felt. And you kind of lived what he was writing.
Yeah, I think Orwell's Coming Up for Air is exactly that, Anthony. I mean, basically, he describes his childhood home, and he chooses to go back, and of course, everything has changed. But by definition, I mean, particularly the early parts of the book, when he's seeing his old home that he's about to go back to through his childhood memories, and it's all idyllic, it's all blissful. And he gets back, of course, and everything's changed.
Wow.
I thought it was awesome. I'm a big Orwell fan.
Yeah, I am. I'm a living in Orwellian times.
Oh, God, yeah. I think we're
living in Orwellian times. I love visionaries. I do love visionaries. I go back to the likes of the wonderful Jules Verne, look at him, H.G. Wells. And then you move forward, and then you look at Orwell himself.
Yeah.
And we all live in that everything that they've written about, and it goes back, believe it or not, to Da Vinci. And Da Vinci, he did a helicopter, he did a submarine, he had the vision, he was a genius. It's not that, I am impressed by geniuses, believe it or not, but I think we have to be. But the problem is, not the problem, but the beauty is, we can relate to them. You've only got to have a little bit of a brain cell to relate to these people.
We do, and we change them. It's like Derek has said many times with music, how one thing changes completely the dynamics when someone joins it, and there's that energy and there's that kind of friction and fusion. I mean, Lennon, again, with me, is a perfect example of using literature to bring into a pop world, which again is like Moon and June and Spoon, and and he loved the likes of Edward Lear and people like that, and then obviously the poetry and the stuff that goes with it, and he became a lover of words, wordplay, substitute words for different words, and then I think once the Beatles hit, and everyone else thought we can do our version of that. And Townsend, we were talking about the Who early, is very, very, very smart with that kind of idea of condensing a magnificent novel into 4 verses, you know. And
well, that's what a poem is, isn't it? It's condensed into a story condensed into a short thing. That's what it's all about.
It's so underrated. It's so underrated. Our youngest, our Katie, does poetry, and she doesn't do it to put somewhere or to submit for a book. It's kind of as music, as Derek remembered. It's that thing of getting something out. Same as painting, picture. Same. It's just that thing of expression. Oh, so you write it down. It doesn't necessarily have to go anywhere. You have a book. Yeah.
Exactly. And it's funny, because I like some of the French artists as well, like Matisse.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Well, if you look at Lautrec and his posters for the Moulin Rouge, I mean, they're awesome.
Absolutely. Rodin, there's incredible, so art to me is, and in music as well, you mentioned the Beatles, it's incredible. It's like what Dennis says there. Fave artist, painter, I've always been a big fan of the Impressionists. And he says here, such a rich musical history in Liverpool, Merseybeat, Elvis Costello, Wiley, I know Pete Wiley, Frankie, I know Nasha, know him well. Icicle Works, the Lars was John Power.
Yeah.
He's Francine's first cousin. Echo and the Bunnymen, Lightning Seeds, these are all like bands. These are like recent bands, but you can go back further still, with the Beatles and the Merseybeat era.
Yeah.
And the Merseybeats. Think about the Merseybeats, and one of the lads, Derek, is a great friend of Anthony and myself from the Merseybeats.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting with the British invasion in 1964. The Beatles went on the Ed Sullivan show in about the 8th of February, 64. And what happened, the Beatles' first hit in America was at the same time, basically, I Want to Hold Your Hand. It spent, I think, 7 weeks at number 1. And it really cracked the American market because British acts had made no headway whatsoever over the pond there. But it opened the floodgates. And what was really interesting, when you look at that first year, 64, most of the bands who had that first wave of hits, as it were nearly all Merseybeat bands. Jerry and the Pacemakers, the Searchers, and Bill J. Kramer. If you look at the chronology of the British hits in America, I don't know offhand, top of the head, but it's got to be 60-70%, possibly slightly more, were actually Merseybeat bands in that first sort of 6 or 8 months, which I always thought was really quite fascinating.
Wow, it's surprising, isn't it? How the Merseybeat era, just exploded, especially in America. It just exploded.
Yeah.
And as I said, they've been great artists from Liverpool. I think you mentioned this as well, Derek. that the very first singer to come to get female singer to get a #1 hit was Lita Rosa from Liverpool. With How Much Is That Doggy in the Window?
Yeah.
Terrible song, like, but at least it was #1. How much is that?
Jolly little ditty.
You know what I mean? Ken Dodd.
Yeah.
You know,
Arthur Askew.
Arthur, yeah, the busy little bee. Arthur Askew and the busy little bee. That's shocking, that. Listen, Derek, Bob Marley next time, and Johnny Cash.
And Johnny Cash. Yeah, we'll juxtapose them. It'll be good.
Oh, that'll be brilliant. Absolutely. And it's only because one of the lads mentioned Marley, you know, Bob Marley and Johnny Cash. Because, as Anthony said as well, you know, you agreed with the likes of these two lads, no matter what genre of music you like, you know, even classical, you know, you associate yourself with those two.
Yeah, absolutely.
That'd be great, that. And as I said, I asked Jason to try and play just, you know, just about 20 seconds of, you know, a couple of songs. Burn, burn, burn through a ring of fire, you know, something like that.
And there may be something else that we've missed, because we, you know, that just came up in conversation. Derek brought them up, but there may be someone else with that kind of impact that they had globally, you know, and love, even right up to his death. Johnny Cash was loved everywhere.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. And he went to the jails, didn't he? Because he spent some time in jail himself.
Yeah.
And was it Folsom Blues or something like that, you know, when he went to the jail?
I
And he
can't
sang
remember.
to the audience, you know, the prisoners. Sang to the prisoners. You don't get that, do you? You really don't get that. And I always a friend of mine, she's Russian, lovely girl, and she actually changed her name, believe it or not, to Jane Beatles, because she loved the Beatles. And they used to, during the Soviet time, they used to have to go underground and play the music. And she was with these doctors and whatever, so they used to get the acetates, you know, from the likes of X-rays, and print the music on them. And they used to play them underground. And that's the Beatles for you. That's Jane. And incredible stories she said to us. You know, I had her on the show once, and she was telling us all about it. And that's the beauty of music. That's the love of music. That is it. You know, it's incredible. So Bob Marley, Oh Woman Don't Cry, and all this, you know, and Johnny Cash. And I can't wait for it. So you come back whenever you're ready.
Yeah, that'd be brilliant.
Oh, made up with that, Eric. And Anthony, thank you so much, mate. Tonight. It's been brilliant tonight, absolutely. And everybody's enjoyed it. The Anfield Raw sending all those pints and everything. And every Dennis Papera, the Scouse Red. What part of Ireland you come from, mate? To the Gardens. You can't get any better than that. And on that wonderful note, I've just got to thank the wonderful Gap Painting Services. And Gap Painting Services sponsored the Frank Carlyle show. And with this, you know, if you're an NHS worker, if you're an elderly, please get them in. Don't struggle. Please don't struggle, because you get a special discount if you're in those categories of elderly and NHS worker. Even if you're not in those categories, they're very reasonable. They really are. Please don't struggle about doing your place up. Get these people in fully insured, fully time-served lads. And that's Gap Painting Services, who sponsored the Frank Carlyle show. And I've got to thank you, Derek. Absolutely fascinating as usual. And there's, you can find Derek on Rock'n'Roll Unravelled, and there's his thing there. And you can get it on the, on our little site there. Everything that you need to know about music. And of course, my dear friend Anthony Brown and his works and everything else. And there he is. Anthony Brown Art. Search Facebook, Instagram, or Google for Anthony Brown Artist. And, it's been great. And Ian Max says, thanks for the show, lads. Thank you, Ian, for staying with us. And it's all for me to say. I've got to thank Jason, because without Jason, I wouldn't have views on it. There's no way I could set everything up. So I have to thank him. But most importantly, who we have to thank are the people out there. The people, the likes of Ian Mac, the likes of Dennis, the likes of Scouse Red, the likes of the outfield or Lynn Ellis, everybody, all of them, who's been contributing to the pod tonight. And I'll be seeing you in a couple of weeks. And tomorrow, don't forget, it's 5:30. I'll be doing a live podcast pre-match against Nottingham Forest. And after the game at 10 o'clock, it'll be the post-match as well. So we've got a pre-match and a post-match. And I suppose you'll be getting fed up with Frank anyway. So I'll just hopefully see you all tomorrow. And once again, thank you, boys. Thank you, Derek. Thank you, Anthony.
Brilliant. Loved it, mate. Really good.
Really good.
We'll see you all tomorrow. Ci vediamo. Ciao. Ciao, Bella.